You think detachment means walking away. It doesn't. Most people misunderstand what it means to be detached. They confuse it with avoidance, with running, with building walls so high that nothing can touch them. That's not detachment. That's fear dressed up as wisdom. Real detachment is something else entirely. It's the ability to stand in the middle of chaos and remain calm. Not because you don't care, but because you've separated yourself from the need for things to be different than they are. You're still there, still present, still engaged, but nothing owns you. Not the outcome, not the person, not the situation. This is one of the most misunderstood concepts in psychology, and it's one of the most powerful. Because when you learn to detach without escaping, you gain something most people never experience. Control that doesn't require force, peace that doesn't require withdrawal, strength that doesn't require hardness. Let's be clear about what we're talking about. Detachment without escape means you participate fully in life. You show up, you engage, you care, even. But internally, there's a separation, a space between you and the thing itself. You're no longer fused to it. When most people engage with something, they merge with it. Their identity becomes wrapped up in the outcome. Their emotional state becomes dependent on how it unfolds. They need it to go a certain way, and that need becomes a chain. This is attachment, and attachment is control in reverse. You think you're controlling the situation, but the situation is controlling you. Detachment breaks that chain, but it doesn't break your connection to the world. This distinction matters more than you realize. Think about someone you know who's always calm, not checked out, not indifferent, but genuinely calm, even when things fall apart. They're present. They listen. They respond. But they don't spiral. They don't collapse when things don't go their way. That's not because they don't care. It's because they've learned something fundamental about how control actually works. Control isn't about making things happen. It's about not needing them to. The paradox is this: the less you need something, the more power you have over it. The moment you need an outcome, that outcome has power over you. And most people spend their entire lives trapped in this dynamic without ever seeing it. They need their relationship to work, so they become desperate, and desperation pushes the other person away. They need their business to succeed, so they become rigid, and rigidity kills creativity. They need respect, so they demand it, and demanding respect guarantees you won't get it. The need itself becomes the obstacle. Detachment removes the need. But here's what makes it different from escape. You still engage, you still try, you still invest effort and attention. You just don't invest your sense of self. This is where most people get it wrong. They think detachment means becoming cold, distant, unavailable. It doesn't. You can be warm and detached, present and detached, caring and detached. Detachment isn't about your external behavior. It's about your internal position. Imagine you're playing a game you care about winning. You try hard, you strategize, you give it everything you have. But when it's over, whether you win or lose, you're still you. The outcome doesn't change your value. It doesn't define you. It doesn't own you. That's detachment. Now imagine you play that same game, but your entire sense of worth is riding on the outcome. If you win, you're valuable. If you lose, you're nothing. Same game, same effort, completely different internal experience. In the second version, you're not free. You're a prisoner of the outcome, and that imprisonment changes everything. Your decisions become desperate. Your strategy becomes defensive. Your enjoyment disappears. You're no longer playing the game. The game is playing you. This is what happens in most people's lives. They're playing, but they're not free. They're engaged, but they're owned. And the cost is enormous. Because when something owns you, it controls your emotional state, your thoughts, your behavior, your sense of identity. You become reactive instead of responsive, defensive instead of open, rigid instead of adaptive. You lose access to your own intelligence. This is the real danger of attachment. Not that you care, but that caring turns into need, and need turns into dependence, and dependence turns into a kind of psychological slavery. You can't think clearly when you're attached. You can't see options. You can't adapt. Your brain goes into a mode where it's trying to protect what you have or get what you need, and that mode is narrow, survival-oriented, limited. Detachment opens that back up. When you're detached, you see more clearly. You think more flexibly. You respond more intelligently, not because you don't care, but because you're not afraid of losing. Fear of loss is what attachment really is, and fear makes you stupid. Let me give you an example. You're in a conversation with someone. You want them to understand your point. You want them to agree with you. Maybe you even need them to see you as intelligent, as right, as valuable. That need changes how you communicate. You become argumentative. You stop listening. You get defensive when they push back. The conversation becomes a battle, and battles have winners and losers. So now your ego is involved. Your identity is at stake. You've merged with the outcome. Now imagine the same conversation, but you're detached. You still want to communicate clearly. You still prefer that they understand. But you don't need it. If they disagree, fine. If they don't get it, fine. If they think you're wrong, fine. You're still you. Your value isn't on the table. This changes everything. You listen better because you're not defending. You explain more clearly because you're not attacking. You stay calm because there's nothing to lose. And paradoxically, you're far more likely to actually connect with them. Because people respond to freedom, not need. When you need something from someone, they feel it, and they pull away. When you don't need anything, they relax, and connection becomes possible. This is true in relationships, in business, in every interaction you have. Detachment makes you more effective, not less. But here's the part that's hard to accept. Detachment requires you to be okay with loss. Not happy about it, not seeking it, but okay with it. You have to be willing to lose the relationship, lose the opportunity, lose the outcome. Not because you want to, but because your internal stability can't depend on keeping it. This is terrifying for most people, because most people have built their entire sense of security on external things. Their relationships, their achievements, their reputation. If those things go away, they don't know who they are. So they cling, and clinging is the opposite of detachment. Clinging is need made visible, and need is weakness made visible, not moral weakness. Psychological weakness, the kind that makes you manipulable, controllable, predictable. When someone knows what you need, they have power over you. They can give it or withhold it, and that dynamic shapes everything. Detachment removes that power. When you don't need anything from anyone, you become very difficult to control. This is why detachment is a form of power. Real power. Not the kind that forces others to comply. The kind that makes you immune to force. You can't be threatened with loss if you're not afraid of losing. You can't be manipulated with rewards if you're not desperate for them. You can't be controlled through your emotions if your emotions aren't tied to external outcomes. This is freedom. But it's not the freedom of escape. It's not the freedom of not caring. It's the freedom of remaining engaged while being internally sovereign. You're in the world, but not of it. Participating, but not possessed. This is a psychological state that takes practice, because everything in your biology wants you to attach, to bond, to need. Attachment is survival strategy. It kept our ancestors alive. It kept them connected to their tribe, their resources, their mates. But in the modern world, attachment often works against you, because the threats aren't physical anymore. They're psychological, social, economic, and attachment makes you vulnerable to all of them. When you're attached to your status, criticism devastates you. When you're attached to your relationship, rejection destroys you. When you're attached to your beliefs, challenge threatens you. You become fragile, defensive, small. Detachment is the antidote. It doesn't mean you don't have status, relationships, or beliefs. It means they don't have you. There's a Buddhist concept that's relevant here: non-attachment. But Western psychology has its own version too: differentiation. Differentiation is the ability to maintain your sense of self in the presence of others, to stay connected without merging, to care without needing. Highly differentiated people can be intimate without losing themselves. They can disagree without defensiveness. They can be rejected without collapsing, because their stability comes from within, not from the relationship. This is detachment in practice, and it shows up in how they handle conflict, how they make decisions, how they respond to loss. They grieve, but they don't break. They feel disappointment, but they don't spiral. They experience pain, but they don't become it. There's a space between stimulus and response, and in that space, they have choice. Most people don't have that space. They're reactive. Something happens, and they're immediately flooded with emotion. The emotion drives the behavior. The behavior creates consequences, and they feel like they have no control. Detachment creates that space. It slows everything down, not because you're suppressing emotion, but because you're not fused with it. You feel anger, but you're not anger. You feel fear, but you're not fear. You feel desire, but you're not desire. You're the awareness that contains these things, and that awareness has freedom. This is where the control comes from, not control over external events, control over your internal response. And your internal response determines everything else: how you interpret situations, how you make decisions, how you treat people, how you move through the world. When your internal response is dictated by attachment, you're a puppet. The world pulls the strings. When your internal response comes from detachment, you're free. You choose what to feel, what to think, what to do, not in some forced artificial way, but in a way that's aligned with your actual values, not your needs. This distinction is crucial. Your needs make you desperate. Your values make you strong. Needs are about deficiency. Something is missing, and you have to fill it. Values are about direction. Something matters, and you move toward it. Detached people operate from values. Attached people operate from needs. And you can see the difference immediately. Someone operating from values is calm, clear, consistent. Someone operating from needs is anxious, chaotic, contradictory. They say one thing and do another. They want to be respected but act desperately. They want to be loved but push people away. Because need creates internal conflict. You need the thing, but needing it makes you less likely to get it. Detachment resolves the conflict. You want the thing, but you don't need it. So you can pursue it from a place of strength instead of weakness. And strength attracts. Weakness repels. This is true in every domain. In business, desperation kills deals. Clients sense it. Partners sense it. Investors sense it. And they use it against you. Or they simply walk away. Detachment gives you leverage, because if you don't need the deal, you can walk away. And the ability to walk away is the foundation of negotiation power. In relationships, neediness destroys attraction. The person who needs less has more power, not because power should be the goal, but because that's how the psychology works. People are attracted to those who have options, who don't need them specifically, who choose them freely rather than desperately. Detachment creates that dynamic naturally, not as manipulation, as genuine internal reality. You could lose them, and you'd be okay. So you're choosing them, every day. Not because you have to, because you want to. That changes the entire relationship. In your own mind, neediness creates obsession. You think about the thing constantly. You can't let it go. You can't focus on anything else. It owns your attention, and attention is your most valuable resource. Detachment frees your attention. You can think about other things, focus on other areas, be present with what's actually in front of you, instead of being consumed by what you need. This is what psychological freedom actually looks like. Not the absence of desire, the absence of compulsion. You can want things without being driven by them, care about things without being controlled by them, try for things without being destroyed by failure. That's the state we're talking about. And it's accessible, but it requires something most people resist. It requires you to face the possibility of loss without flinching. This is the practice, the actual work of detachment. You have to voluntarily imagine losing the thing, the person, the outcome, and sit with that. Feel it. Let it be real. Not to make yourself suffer, but to prove to yourself that you can survive it. Because until you know you can survive it, you're a prisoner of it. The fear of loss is what creates attachment. And fear is only powerful when you're avoiding it. When you turn toward fear, when you let yourself feel it fully, it loses its grip. You realize it's just sensation, just thought, just emotion. It's not reality, and it's not you. This is exposure. Psychological exposure. The same principle that works for phobias works for attachment. You face the thing, repeatedly, without avoiding, without escaping. And gradually, the fear response weakens. You build tolerance, resilience, capacity, until the thing you fear doesn't control you anymore. Most people never do this. They spend their entire lives avoiding the feeling of loss. So they stay attached, stay controlled, stay small. Because attachment is a defense against loss. But it's a defense that imprisons you. Detachment is the willingness to face loss. And that willingness is what sets you free. This doesn't mean you become reckless, or careless, or nihilistic. You still protect what matters. You still invest in relationships. You still work toward goals. But you do it from a different place, a place of choice rather than compulsion. And that makes all the difference. Because when you're detached, you see clearly. You're not distorted by fear or need. You can assess situations accurately, make decisions rationally, respond appropriately. You're not overreacting, not underreacting. You're calibrated. This is emotional intelligence in its highest form. Not the ability to express emotion, the ability to maintain perspective while feeling emotion, to be sad without being consumed, angry without being destructive, afraid without being paralyzed. The emotion moves through you, but it doesn't move you. You remain stable, centered, yourself. This is what detachment without escape looks like in practice. You're there, feeling everything, experiencing everything, but you're not lost in it. You're not identified with it. You're the space in which it occurs. And from that space, you have freedom. The freedom to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be driven, to engage rather than withdraw. This is the goal. Not to stop caring, but to care without attachment, to love without possession, to try without desperation, to lose without destruction, to remain engaged while nothing owns you. It sounds simple. It's not. Because your entire psychological structure is built on attachment, your sense of identity, your emotional patterns, your behavioral habits. All of it is organized around getting and keeping what you need. Detachment requires you to reorganize that structure, to build a new foundation, one that doesn't depend on external stability, that doesn't require the world to be a certain way for you to be okay. This takes time, it takes practice, it takes courage. But it's possible, and once you start to experience it, even in small moments, you realize what you've been missing. You've been missing yourself. The real you, the one that exists independent of circumstances, the one that's okay no matter what happens. That version of you is always there, but it's buried under layers of attachment, of need, of fear. Detachment clears those layers away, not by force, not by suppression, but by seeing through them, by recognizing that the thing you're attached to isn't actually what you need. What you need is already here, inside you, independent of anything external. This is the insight that changes everything. You don't need the relationship to feel loved. You need to recognize the love that already exists within you. You don't need the achievement to feel worthy. You need to recognize the worth that's inherent. You don't need the approval to feel valuable. You need to recognize the value that can't be given or taken away. All of it is already there. Attachment obscures it. Detachment reveals it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize you've been chasing something you already have, fighting for something that can't be lost, and the desperation falls away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped needing. And from that place, you can engage with life fully, completely, fearlessly. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because even if it does, you'll be okay. That's the promise of detachment without escape. You remain in the game, but the game can't break you. You remain connected, but the connection can't trap you. You remain present, but the present doesn't define you. You're here, fully here, and nothing owns you.